Welcome to episode 7. We saw 2 films this week. One new one, which we'll talk about for 2 minutes, I guess.
Yep.
And another one, which I was delighted to watch. I was glad that you suggested it.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
But we need to get that. We need to get the kiddies on board with the show. So we've got to talk about something they like.
Yeah, well, the first movie, Fear Street, 1994. Is that the name of the movie? It's a Netflix original,
Yeah.
so that's all you really need to know.
It doesn't operate on the same level of cuties, so that might disappoint a few people. Hopefully, no one that listens to our show.
Yeah.
Just got to flag that.
I can't even. I don't know what to say about it. It's definitely not directed for people our age. It's extreme. It doesn't know what it wants to be. I don't think personally. Music cuts, constant changing in what do you call it? Tone, constant tone changes. Really like just when you say horror movie characters are stupid, some of these people are next level, like bad decision makers, man. Like I don't know what to tell you, man. It's a very very mediocre slasher film.
I feel like we might have been hyped up ever so slightly because Davina, who was of course guest starred on our Kong and Zilla episode, he was pretty keen to watch it. He said, "Oh, he'd already watched it rather," and he said, "Oh, guys, come on, watch this amazing movie with me." And we're kind of going through it, and I don't know, I felt a bit bad because as we were pointing out stuff that was just sloppy, he's kind of like, I feel like I don't like this movie anymore.
Yeah, he realized. I think he watched it when he was tired, so he was a bit skewed. Although he says the next part is better, and I'm inclined to believe because it's basically a Friday the 13th parody.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I like the concept in terms of it's a trilogy that's coming all out at once almost, or like a part of a big 4.5-hour film that's split into 3, I guess, and going back in time. Yeah. But yeah, it's just not. It's an ADD film for me. Like, it's super fast paced and
it's definitely meant to draw in the attention of younger people who need that constant. Next. I need constant stimulation.
Music was changing every 3 minutes, and it was basically just telling you what is happening in the scene and how to feel. It wasn't really clever. But yeah, no, it's odd. Just on the point you mentioned, even though it's made for people, I guess, who are younger than us, so let's say early to mid-teens, even late teens potentially, a lot of the nods and references in these films, I don't even think we would have picked up on or really cared for.
Well, yeah, if I wasn't like into the kind of music I am and stuff, I'd be like, what the fuck's this?
Who are these bands?
But conveniently, I just knew I do like that kind of music, so I knew who was in, like, for parts of the time, there were songs I was like, oh, I like that song. I love that band. But the demographic that is aimed towards to definitely would not be receptive to that for the most part.
For sure. And unfortunately, it has the trope of, like, a concept that doesn't make sense when you think about it. I guess without touching on it, I mean, we're not giving it a glowing review by any means, but for anyone who wants to see it.
I don't really care. Spoiler review because I don't care about the movie. Sam is one of the characters. I only remember her name because I think it got said the most, and she was the main target. She is the person that is the witch is after for some fucking reason. Because she removed the bones or moved the witch's bones from where that she was buried. There's a witch for some reason. Anyway, the killers are all after her, and also anyone who's covered in her blood.
But there's people who get killed that aren't covered in her blood.
There's the hospital worker or the 2 hospital workers that get killed for no real reason. I guess just because he crossed the killer's path. But even then, the killer avoided people who.
Yeah, it didn't bother. They would just pass them because otherwise, the brother of the main character would have gotten attacked by the Axeman.
Kingsley, recording.
Kingsley, guest starring.
He's revved up.
Oh yeah, no, his blood gets boiling when we talk about shit films.
He doesn't like this movie. That's right. Kingsley only barks for shit movies. It definitely had absolutely bare minimum amount of thought put into the continuity of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would have to say.
Oh, absolutely. I'm shocked it's doing as well as it is, ratings wise. But
What are the ratings?
I've seen 9 out of 10s. I mean, I've seen a few average ones, but I've seen a lot of 4-star reviews, and they don't dive deep into like what they like about it. A part of me is probably cynical and thinks it's the lesbian relationship that's sort of at the forefront of the film. They don't explicitly state it, but they
That helps
do.
a lot of movies to have some like representation. Will just boost its rating because obviously these people want to support seeing that in their films. I don't know. At the same time, you gotta take the idea that maybe you want to see it in good films and not obviously just being forced into a bad film. Like, to be honest, in my opinion, that's probably one reason it's in there is like they're just like, oh, put this in, as executives do.
Yeah.
Kids love this shit.
Mm-hmm.
Here's something interesting. It's actually based on a book by R.L. Stein, a horror fiction series by R.L. Stein.
I want to say I've read one of them. Fear Street sounds very, because I think that's the book title, right? Or the series of books.
It's the series title. So, Ghosts of Fear Street.
I remember reading some R.L. Stein. I loved them as a kid.
So it's obviously not the same as Goosebumps, but it's by the same person.
Same kind of vibe. I wonder what he would think of his work being butchered as it is.
He's like, money. I don't think he really has ever cared too much about the quality of what gets made into TV or film from his.
You do have to wonder though sometimes, like these great, and you can even be musicians when a cover of a song is made or a film is remade or like a story's inspired or flipped around in a new medium or subverted in some way. I always wonder how the original writer, filmmaker, musician, whatever would have felt.
I know there are examples of musicians that I know of that have outright said that they hated cover versions of their songs. Oh, okay. Here's an example. A very obscure example that nobody will get. But there's a band called Sepultura, who got their name from a song by another band called Motorhead. The song has something to do with the graves, and Sepultura is Brazilian or Portuguese for grave. And they're from Brazil, so they speak Portuguese. They covered a song of Motorhead's called Orgasmatron, and the main guy from Motorhead said like he didn't really enjoy the cover because they played it too fast compared to the original. That was his only problem with it. But yeah, there are examples of people like outright stating that they didn't enjoy homages to their previous work and stuff. If you've made it with like a specific intent behind it in mind, and somebody changes up an aspect, like the tempo of certain songs can completely change the what your perception of the song is meant to be as the writer. So yeah, that's that.
That's our brief review of Fear Street. I mean, if Davin says that the second one was okay, I might see it. I mean, it's on.
Yeah,
it's on
I might watch it.
Not much to watch.
I might watch it for us and then tell you if you want to bother watching it, or we can just watch it again together and just make fun of it.
We should get Davin in again so we can bully him as we're going through and go, oh, this doesn't make sense.
Passively aggressively shut down his opinion about things like this fucking stupid crap.
The composer for that film was the Scream composer, which surprised me because I don't remember
man's out of work.
Yeah, I don't remember his score being very there's moments where they just play the most bizarre, where he has the most bizarre compositions that don't need to be played. You can just have silence.
Yeah, he seems afraid to have silence.
It's got to constantly be something just playing in your ear. If it's not a licensed track, it's just something he's made. It just comes off goofy. We watched Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. Yeah, just last night, so it's fresh in our minds. I guess I might let you take the floor. When did you first come across this?
So I've always loved Monty Python. I remember I got introduced to the Holy Grail when I was maybe like 7 or 8, and
Mhm.
I watched it incessantly for probably a few months. I just watched it over and over and over and over again. I've only watched Life of Brian a couple times, and I know that's everybody's favorite. I know everybody loves Life of Brian. That's my least favorite, personally. In saying that, it doesn't mean I dislike it at all. It's still absolutely hilarious. But to me, it's just not as funny as the other two of those first three.
If you had a copy of each of them, you wouldn't play
Put
that
that one
disc,
on
so to
first,
speak. Yeah.
unless I've just watched the other two.
Yeah.
And then you have The Meaning of Life. I first watched it at my uncle's house. It was on TV. It just happened to be on TV. It's by far probably the film that makes me laugh the most out of most films. Maybe on par with the other guys, which we did last episode. Most people aren't super fond of it in comparison to the other two.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I'm sure it's some of the skits might have been a bit too much for some people, because I did a little bit of background reading, so to say, just to get a sense of what the reception of the film was like. Just because this was one that was on my radar, but not one that people were like fanatic about. I
Yeah,
watched, obviously, I think the first one of their films they made, I think at your place when we were young. You showed it.
Holy Grail.
Yeah, and then Life of Brian, I think, was a favourite of my dad's or some family member, and they were adamant I watch it, so I did, and I
Yeah,
quite enjoy it. But yeah, never the same for Meaning of Life. No one ever said, oh, if you love Life of Brian, you like this, or if you're a fan of Monty Python. And it does look like that's what's happened. Some people, at least critics, didn't really find it to be in good taste most of the time.
like it
Uh,
was very like too raunchy for them.
in some
Okay.
senses, I especially, I mean, this sort of the common repeat offender was the vomit sketch, which you
Yeah,
gave me warning about. It is kind of excessive.
that's my least favorite part of the movie. Um, I think it just goes on for a little bit too long.
I do
The
think the saving grace is kind of the tracking shot that follows after, where for like
the
another
French
three
is like, follow
minutes,
me.
it's like follow me, come on, not long to go. And it just keeps
Causes a
fading.
giant car crash like, crossing the street. You just hear it, but
Yeah,
they never even like turn around to make sure anybody's okay. Uh,
yeah. When I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to say about this, the first word that kind of came to my mind was creative. This is a very creative film. All the sketches they do, like even just the opening sequence, it's sort of a little revolt, mutiny between some old accountants. I'm not too sure what they were doing, in this corporate building, uh, fighting up against, the younger chaps who are sort of their managers. But then it turns into like a
yeah,
swashbuckling adventure story. They become pirates and they're sailing their building. It's just
yeah.
completely ludicrous, but it's so imaginative like that. And that's sort of what happens throughout the whole film. And for me, a lot of the humor kind of came from like mixing up genres. So you had
That's
like
always yeah.
yeah, you have an Oliver Twist style poverty story musical, but they're talking
Yorkshire,
about
yeah.
semen.
And selling his and selling his children
Yeah,
to medical experiments.
like
I
that's one of many. So it's kind of I guess maybe some people might have been shocked where that's just a bit too over the top for them.
I honestly think if they released that movie today, it would have done better. Um,
Hmm.
just because people are more desensitized to things now.
And something
Yeah.
you said to me when we were sort of chatting about just after we'd finished it, and I might get you to elaborate on it, but you also said it was a very meme culture kind of film, just in the way it's made.
Well, specifically the middle of the film,
Oh, the
um,
intermission.
find the fish, which is just the most absurd thing, where they're just speaking in rhyme and they've just got it looks like they've just raided a fucking prop warehouse and just chucked on what they could find as quickly as possible and just impromptually done it. And
Hmm.
it's even on a handheld cam, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This isn't really a film in the sense of the other two, Holy Grail, Life of Brian, where there's sort of
a coherent
a
story and
story.
stuff.
Yeah, this is kind of like a compilation of skits that they may have come up with at some point, but was too raunchy for the BBC or whatever they aired on back in the day.
Yeah, for their actual show. Yeah.
And it was
That's a good
interesting
point.
because I couldn't find a lot on it, but I tried to find a few interviews, and I think it was what's his name? It's Michael.
Palin?
Yeah, he's talking about the writing process, and it was kind of a bit of a headache. Is the sense I get, because it was kind of just, such a loose structure, and they said, "Fuck it, let's just, this is funny. Let's just put this stuff in the film."
I guess making it about the meaning of life opens it up to so many possibilities, because really there is no meaning of life. Like at the end, she just gets, or he, Michael Palin, dressed as a woman, gets the envelope. She's like, "Oh, just be nice. Don't eat too many fats. Go for a walk every now and again, and then get along with all people of creeds and colors, and just don't be a dick." And that's the meaning of life. Like it's so nonchalant. It's just, and it's so obvious. Like just don't be a fucking dick and just look
Yeah.
after yourself.
And that's another thing that they had mentioned in their interview was the beauty of ending up with that loose structure was like, oh, well, that's kind of how life is. There's no real kind of like
Stuff doesn't plan out.
Yeah, I also it is kind of connected, sort of thematically at least. Like it's kind of chronologically going through a person's life, quote unquote. Not the same characters or anything, but the different stages of life.
Yeah.
And so, in a weird way, it kind of reminded me of something like A Space Odyssey. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I'm not sure if that would be your kind of film, but that's sort of the same structure where it's different vignettes or like a series of different stories, self-contained, but they're kind of loosely connected to human evolution in that case.
Right.
So it's all kind of an overarching, like, where's man progressing to in space? Whereas this is sort of just like different kind of skits that are all kind of connected. One of the things I found in a lot of the humor from this film in particular is how nonchalant everyone is when there's like very horrific scenes of violence happening around them. Even the Zulu thing in Africa, the Zulu Wars, kind of the setting of the skit in the 1850s or whenever that might have been, I can't recall. And it's like all the officers just being chill, trying to figure out what happened to this guy's missing leg, and all of their underlings are basically getting slaughtered by a tribe. Just behind them, getting sliced up.
And they're only concerned with the other, like, high-class officer's leg. And even when the guy comes in, he's like, oh, we've got 50 casualties, they're all dead. He goes, oh, yes, very interesting, very well, very well. Got a problem here. And then he's like, what? He's like, oh, officer so-and-so has lost his leg. And even the guy who's like just almost died fighting on the Zulu warriors, like, oh, no, sir. I think the best example of that, though, is the live organ donation. That might be my favorite skit, just because of how nonchalant the two, I guess, collectors are. Like when they walk in there, and the best the best line is when he's like, "Can we have your liver?" But I'm still using it, and they just barge into his house. He's like, "Come on, sir, don't muck us about."
Yeah, and even when that's all happening and he's having this horrific live surgery, his wife's in the background exploring the cosmos in this sort of dreamlike musical.
She comes in and she tells him off because she's like, "Oh, I told him not to get one of those silly cards." And his son comes in. I don't know if you saw that. It's very quick. He comes in. He's like, "All right, I'm off to school. See you, Dad."
I missed that part.
And leaves.
I think one of my favorite skits, and this seems to be a popular one for a lot of people, maybe because it was quote unquote the safest, was like, it is very brief. It's the rugby. I mean, it's the sex ed one, but specifically like the rugby game that follows.
Oh yeah,
where it's like
against the Masters.
Young teenage boys playing against their teachers who just beat the shit out of them pretty much. It's so just...
Well, yeah, not only do they just annihilate them in the game, but you see them in the background, like, piling on kids, punching them, and, like, stomping on their heads. So good.
A lot of people also quite like the fake... Not the fake opening, but the skit that kind of opens before the proper set of skits related to the meaning of life. So what I mentioned earlier on,
the Crimson Permanent Reassurance.
Yeah, the pirate theme, which sort of surprised me. I mean, I really liked it. I think you said it was went on for a bit too long for your liking.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit I don't know. It is funny, and it is like the whole concept is like very funny and very clever, very well made. The models are incredibly good.
Yeah,
It's well executed, but by the end of it, I'm just like, and I think the reason it's slow for me is because I know what's coming next, and in my opinion, it's better. So I'm just like,
right.
let's just get to the good stuff.
I just wanted to sort of comment, like, yeah, the production design, the sets, the costumes, some of the amazing effects, even that vomit sequence, as disgusting as it is, and just the musicals, it's all quite incredibly well done. You know, if someone hated this movie completely, I think they would still have to concede that this is just a really well organized picture. Something interesting I found out because I was kind of curious. I'm always curious how they do this. Oh, pardon me, my voice broke. Obviously, there's kids that are kind of mixed up in a lot of jokes that are sexual innuendo or very explicit.
Yeah.
And so apparently Terry Jones in the scene where he's talking about why there's so many of them, he was saying that he puts a little rubber thing on the end of his sock, and so they would just dub over cock in kind of post production. Some of the kids knew
Oh,
what he was referring to, like the older
I mean,
ones.
yeah, the kids aren't dumb.
Yeah, like, but you can't understandably say that sort of stuff in front of. And then I guess they were mouthing lyrics to to different words, and then obviously they would just get people who sound like children or change voices around, so that you heard the lyrics about,
That's
oh,
very
what is it, the
funny.
beauty? How's it go? The
Oh, wait, what do you mean? Every sperm is sacred.
every
If
sperm is sacred. Yes. And then I think the sex ed scene, John Cleese basically said that it was just being filmed with no children at all. So I'm sure if you go back there, it's
oh, like,
probably like
no, no,
a
no.
projection and editing thing. Yeah. And then the only other thing which I found out, which made a bit of sense because it was a bit of a strange skit, was I think the first one that come is a hospital where this woman's giving birth and she's kind of being neglected, and they're talking about all this new machinery. And apparently, Graham Chapman was a doctor, and so that was kind of inspired by like his work at the time, where he noticed that there were all these new machines coming around and equipment, and so people could just afford to chat to one another while their patient was on an operating table. And so I
Yeah.
guess they just turned it up to 11, so to speak. So I mean, I like those little like pulling from little bits of life experience. You know, that's kind of what makes a
I suppose
good
that's where
story.
most of their comedy would come from, though. Especially the original, like just the like flying circus stuff, the very OG stuff. Speaking of Graham Chapman, and we were talking earlier about Beer Street 1994, and in that song, in that movie, sorry, there's an Iron Maiden song. The last bit of film that Graham Chapman appeared in before he died was a music video for Maiden for their song "Can I Play with Madness." That was his last film appearance.
It's always neat to kind of sort of see these greats, you know, and where they've kind of, I wouldn't say ended up in, but just sort of like what happens to be their last little contribution, and it's sort of just sort of it's in a place you would least expect it to be. You go, oh, that's kind of cool. Like
Yeah,
Orson Welles, who's a famous filmmaker, Citizen Kane, Magnificent Ambersons, and all that. He did voice work. He did acting. I think one of his last roles right before he died was a transformer in the 1985 animated film. I think he played one of the villains,
oh yeah.
which is kind of a bizarre place to find him, but you kind of go, oh, that's kind of a neat little exit. Some people would appreciate that, I'm sure. He was originally envisioned for Darth Vader's voice, but George Lucas thought he was too famous and too
Really?
recognizable. Yeah. If you hear him, he made his way to film through radio. So if you ever listen to like the old Shadow radio stations, I'm sure I think he's done a few episodes where he played the Shadow. He has a pretty good commanding voice.
Why do I know the Shadow? I swear there's an old cartoon that references the Shadow. And they're like, Shadow knows. Is that the
Yeah,
right
that's the
thing?
Shadow. The Batman animated series references the Grey Ghost,
Grey Ghost?
which is basically
No,
the
no, 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 no,
Shadow.
no. I'm talking like
Oh, Fallout 4.
1930s, 1940s
Fallout 4 references the
cartoon.
Shadow.
Yeah, you can become
You
him as
reenact.
well.
Yeah.
No. It's in an old like black and white cartoon
Oh, that
that I
was
used to watch when I was a young kid.
that was kind of like the MCU, so to speak, in terms of popularity back in the day. So it could very well just be an old shadow cartoon. Like that guy was everywhere, mainly in the US, but all
No.
sorts of radio stations.
It plays on a radio and scares someone.
Mm.
Oh, it's a cartoon called The Talking Magpies.
Oh, okay. I've never heard of that. I guess yeah. Final sort of mentions or statements, what have you, on meaning of life. For me, um, I probably still prefer Life of Brian as my
Mm-hmm.
kind of favorite of the three films now that I've seen them. I do think that it's good when they have a story to kind of anchor to, um, which can then be used as a jumping point to get into the ludicrous, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not that, again, I enjoyed this film a lot, but I, I, I feel like they needed that kind of baseline.
Keep the entertainment rolling if there's any slow parts, sort of, so you're at least invested as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. Or even, I mean, in a lot of ways, you could probably argue that this is just a collection of. I might have even mentioned this earlier in the podcast. Skits that are like that couldn't for
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
reason
you
make it
said
past the
earlier.
censor. Let's just chuck it all in type of
Could also
affair.
You could also argue that having a grounded story makes the absurd even more absurd instead of just
Yeah.
having everything be absurd all the time. Because it's like I don't know if we said it in Kong versus Godzilla versus Kong, but you need like in the same way you need humans and the perspective of humans in those movies to make the big things seem big. You
Hmm.
need something that's normal to make absurd things seem absurd. Just
Yeah.
like good needs to exist so bad can exist, and bad needs to exist so good can exist type shit.
I mean, a really good example is someone like David Lynch. Even though he makes very surreal stuff, there is kind of a clear narrative at play. Like one of my favorite movies of all time is Eraserhead, and
Yeah.
it's a pretty simple story about a guy who doesn't really want to be a father. Um, but from that, it's kind of there's all these layers and themes and just sort of stylist, like bizarre, weird dream shit that happens, but you still kind of know what's going on, what's sort of in the character's psyche, what's kind of real. And even in Twin Peaks, the show he made, it's sort of a story of an FBI agent, in a small town trying to solve a murder, and all the
Mm.
quirkiness comes from the characters he interacts with.
Um.
And there's more bizarre demon type stuff as that show progresses, but you still have the ordinary. Like I'm just giving another example, I guess.
Yeah. I guess I think I have never seen it. I know they're the reference with like the red curtains and the checkerboard room.
So that's kind of meant to be like
Is that the right show? Am I
a
thinking Twin
different,
Peaks
not dimension, but like a different
realm?
kind
It's
of,
like a
yeah.
dream state, isn't it? Anyway,
Yeah.
the only thing I know from David Lynch is that weird fucking 17, 20-minute short film on
Mm.
Netflix, What Did Jack Do? Where he's just
Talking to a
talking
monkey.
to a monkey, and the monkey, like, they're just constantly changing the subject, like, saying different interrogation things. That is such an absurd movie. I don't even know if you could call it a movie.
But yeah, I guess that would unless there's anything else you wanted to say about anything discussed. I think I kind of got through all um that
I
I
don't
wanted
think
to
I have
chat
anything
about.
else to say with the meaning of life. I guess I could just say that I can recite every sperm is sacred word for word.
That is impressive.
Mostly, I mean, pretty much like they're just repeating it over and over again. But there are like a few different verses and whatnot. I think that's all I have to say about the movie.
Yeah, no, that got a good conversation. For me, it's a cautious recommend because I do feel like certain people wouldn't vibe with this movie. Like I would sooner recommend Holy Grail or Life of Brian. I mean, yeah, use those as stepping stones and go like, okay, here's sort of where the humor goes, and then this is kind of like to the extreme.
I wouldn't recommend it to anybody who didn't like offensive humor. That's for sure.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's about it for me. I guess. Bloody hell, I can't remember. I think I asked a question last time. Did you want to ask a question for the audience?
Geez, I don't know if I have a question that relates to this movie.
I guess I've got
You
something
can
in
ask.
mind.
Okay.
Which is better, British humor or American humor?
Oh, it's easy.
Yeah, I think so too. But I mean, that's my
That's
my
our
Anglo
opinion.
heritage, I guess.
It's our opinion.
Hmm.
It's not facts.
That's just your opinion, man. But if you want to ask a question unrelated, go for it.
I honestly can't think of anything. That's a good question.
What question should Kai ask in the next episode of
I don't know.
Sidetracked?
The next episode, depending on what we review, because we always try to keep it relevant.
Keep it
Classic
relevant by
porn.
watching old cartoons from the 30s.
Oh yeah, we can do that. I might make a playlist on YouTube so we can get set up to watch it.
Yeah, no, that'd be good. I'd be down for that. But until then, goodbye, everybody.
Cheerio.